Well, hi guys. Today we're going to talk about the ocean tides. What causes the tides? A lot of people would tell you that the ocean tides are caused by the wind. That the same wind that blows the waves in, that the waves themselves are bringing the ocean tides in. That's what they think. But and it's easy to understand this because when you go to the beach, you're out there and you're playing in the water and you're playing in the waves and the water comes pushing in and the waves roll in. And it just seems like as these waves roll in, then the tides are coming in. So it's a very easy thing to misunderstand there. But the truth is, the tides are actually caused by the moon. Okay? They're caused by the moon. This is my model of the moon. I know it looks like the sun, but today pretend it's the moon. Okay? So as the Earth rotates on its axis, the moon's gravity tugs upward on the ocean. And so the part of the water, the part of the ocean that's right there underneath the moon is kind of pulled up towards it. So it's the moon's gravity that causes these ocean tides. Now, we know the Earth rotates on its axis every 24 hours, and so the moon is like this giant magnet up here, and as the Earth rotates on its axis, a different part of the ocean is right there lined up in front of the moon. So the moon's gravity is steadily pulling on water, but what happens is the part of the Earth that's underneath that gravity is always changing. And as we know, it takes the Earth 24 hours to rotate. And so one rotation of the axis of the Earth for 24 hours, we would have four tides. We'd have two high tides and two low tides. So we have a high tide where the water is lined up direct where a part of the Earth. Let's take Savannah, our own Tybee Beach. Tybee is lined up directly in line with the moon part of the time. That gives us our high tide. Okay? Now, as we know, the Earth is rotating, so Tybee is going to move slowly farther and farther away from the moon, and another part of the Earth is slowly coming up. So as Tybee moves away from the moon, the tide starts getting less and less gravity. There's less pull on the water, so the water level starts dropping down lower and lower and lower. So it takes 6 hours and about 12 minutes for Tybee to get to be at a right angle. Right angles sounds like geometry. Well, math and science, you can't keep them apart. They work together hand in hand. So as the Earth rotates on around, now we'll get a 9-degree angle. So Tybee is as far away from the moon as it can possibly be as far as at the angle. So now Tybee has very low tides. There's the least amount of gravity pulling on the water there will be for this, during this period of time. So now another part of the Earth has a high tide. Tybee has a low tide. Well, it's been about 6 hours and 12 minutes. So the Earth continues to rotate. Now, Tybee moves on until it's on the opposite side of the Earth. It's finally lined back up again with the moon. It just happens to be on the opposite side. But again, we have a high tide. So we have a high tide when the part of the Earth is directly lined up in front of the moon. And then we have another high tide, a second high tide, about 12 hours and 25 minutes later when it's on the opposite side of the Earth, but it's still lined up with the moon. And the moon's gravity is again responsible for having these tides. So if you keep that in mind, we have two high tides, one when your part of the Earth is lined up directly in front of the moon, and when your part of the Earth is on the exact opposite side of the Earth lined up with the moon. So you got to be lined up with the moon to get high tides. And you got to be perpendicular to the moon to get low tides. Okay? Now, there's one little thing we need to look at. When we're talking about these tides, we know that the Earth rotates in 24 hours. So where does this 24 hours and 50-minute thing come in? Because if you're keeping track, we said we have a high tide. 6 hours and 12 minutes later, we have a low tide. 6 hours and 12 more minutes later, we have another high tide. So if you add all that up, it comes up to 24 hours and 48 minutes. Or, so where's that extra 50 minutes coming in there? Well, the moon is not standing still. So here's the Earth, and the moon is slowly moving. It's slowly orbiting around the Earth. Now, so when Tybee is circling, when we're coming around the Earth as we're rotating, instead of it taking 24 hours to catch up to where we were, it takes 24 hours and 50 minutes because the moon has been moving. Okay? So, the moon's gravity causes the tides. As the Earth spins on its axis, the gravity of the moon changes over a different part of the Earth. So the moon's gravity the Earth's location, those forces combine to cause the tides. All right, now we have four main phases of the moon that we want to talk about here, okay? Four main phases of the moon. We're going to start out, we're going to start out with a brand new moon. That comes up and we can't see it at all. It's a brand new moon. On a new moon, we have what they call a spring tide. Now, spring tide is extra high because to get a new moon, we have the sun over here, we have the moon over here, and then we have the Earth. Well, when you look up in the sky, we really can't see the moon because it came up the same time the sun did, and all we can see is a great big bright shiny sun. All right? So a new moon is invisible. We can't see it, but it's there. And it's working with the sun's gravity, and they're really tugging up on this water and making an extra high tide. Now, the second main phase of the moon that we're going to talk about is the first quarter. The first quarter, that's when you look up in the sky and you see the moon and you see half of it's lit up, okay? It looks something kind of like this. You'll see about half of it lit up, okay? Now, of course, I got it turned backwards, so you'll see this half the moon will be lit up and this half will be dark. Now, in this case, the sun's over here, the moon's over here, and my head is the Earth, and so you've got a right angle. There's that geometry stuff again. You've got a right angle, so the moon is tugging the water in this direction, and the sun's taking it this direction, so they're kind of pulling against each other. And that gives us a tide that's not as big. That would be a neap tide. A neap tide. Now, the moon continues its journey until we finally get back around, and now we have a full moon. Well, the full moon, the sun's over here, Earth's in the middle, and the moon is over here. We can see the whole surface lit up. That gives us a full moon, and again, the sun and the moon are working together, and they're really tugging up on that water, and they're making an extra high tide again. We have a second spring tide. Now, the spring tide has nothing to do with the season. It's all about the water. Kind of think of it this way: the water springs a little bit higher. You know, if you spring up and down, you get higher. So spring tide, the tide is even higher. All right. So now, as we know, the moon continues in its journey. See if I can get this done right this time. All right. So we're going to go to our last quarter, okay? Our last quarter moon, third quarter. Again, third quarter is going to be where the moon's here, the sun's here, another right angle, 9 degrees, and we'll have a second, what kind of tide? Another neap tide. Sure, we have another neap tide. So we're going to have, and as it continues its journey, if you're keeping up with me, we're going to have in a month, as it takes, the Earth, as the moon orbits the Earth one complete time, in a month we're going to have 2 spring tides. A spring tide is going to occur when we have the new moon, and a spring tide is going to occur when we have a full moon. And then we have a neap tide, which is not as big, when we have the first quarter and the third quarter. Okay, so keep that in mind. It's not the wind, it's the Earth, the moon's gravity. Primarily, the moon's gravity is what causes the ocean tides. Okay? And also remember, spring tides, which are extra high, neap tides, which are not as high. Tides occur every 6 hours and 12 minutes. There are going to be 2 high tides in a 24-hour period and 2 low tides. And there'll always be a high tide, a low tide. A high tide, a low tide. It always works that way. Okay? So, that's all for today. Catch you later.